The wind was sharp enough to cut, and Eli Calderon stood alone on the wooden platform of Llano Junction, feeling every lash of it across his face. The flat stretch of West Texas yawned in every direction, nothing but sky and dust and silence thick enough to weigh on his chest. He wasn't a man prone to nerves. He'd ridden through Comanche country, fought in the war between the states, and held his dying father's hand without flinching. But today, he couldn't stop the tight coil in his gut. The train was late. That shouldn't have bothered him. But everything about this felt wrong. He kept his hands in his duster pockets, one thumb pressed to the stub of a cigar he wasn't in the mood to light. His hat brim cast a shadow over his dark eyes as he watched the horizon for a column of smoke. Behind him, the dry scrape of boots broke the quiet. She's comin', you think Mateo Teo, to most barely 20 with a clean-shaven jaw and wide, hopeful eyes, stepped beside him, squinting into the sunlight. She's comin', Eli said, though it sounded more like a warning than comfort. You reckon she'll be pretty? Teo grinned. Letters said she's strong with animals, knows how to render lard and fix biscuits with one hand while churning cream with the other. I didn't send for her to bake, Eli muttered. Still. Be nice if she ain't ugly. Eli exhaled hard through his nose. Be nicer if she's who she said she is. The sound of the train finally cut through the dry air, a long, shrill wail that sent a pair of wild dogs scurrying from under the platform. Steam hissed like a snake as the locomotive pulled into the junction iron, screeching on iron. It wasn't a big station, just a single line, a wooden bench, and a man named Hoyt, who ran the place while chewing tobacco and reading dime novels he didn't understand. Eli stepped forward as passengers began to disembark, a preacher with sweat stains under his arms, a family of 6 crammed into 2 small Sunday clothes, a man with a snake oil trunk and a hat too clean for these parts. And then she appeared. Eli's boots rooted to the spot. She stepped down from the passenger car slowly, with deliberate grace, her midnight blue traveling dress clinging to a figure too fine-boned for ranch work. Her gloved hands were wrapped around the handle of a parasol, even though the sun had already dipped low. A veil shaded her face, but not enough to hide the pale curve of her cheek or the watchful, terrified gleam in her eyes. The trunk beside her was the size of a coffin and looked just as heavy. Polished leather with brass corners, finer than anything that had ever sat in his house. That, her Teo whispered. She looks like she stepped off the wrong train, Eli said under his breath, already walking. As he approached, the woman straightened. She wasn't trembling, but she was braced like someone about to be struck. Her gaze met his, and something passed between them that made his stomach tighten. Not recognition, not fear exactly, but something worse. Guilt. You marry Elena Vargas, he asked, stopping just short of her. A beat, then another. Yes, she said softly. Her voice didn't match the letters. It was East Coast cultured, trained too round in the vowels to have ever grown corn. He let his eyes rake over her once, slow and deliberate. You don't look like a woman who's milked a goat. The journey was transformative, she said, lifting her chin. Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Calderon. They better be, he growled. Because if you can't wring a chicken's neck or ride a fence line, you won't last 3 days on my land. She didn't reply, just tightened her grip on her parasol until her knuckles turned white. Eli reached for her trunk, testing its weight. It didn't budge. What the hell do you have in here? Bible stones and wedding regrets books, she said too quickly. And family china. He snorted. China on a cattle spread. That's rich. Teo scrambled to help. We got the wagon out back. Come on, Miss Mary, don't mind him. He's always this sweet. The sun dropped lower as they loaded up and began the slow ride toward the Calderon ranch. The wagon creaked with every bump, and alkali dust kicked up like ghosts around the wheels. Eli took the reins, sitting stiff beside the woman who called herself Mary Elena, though nothing about her smelled like farmland. She didn't speak. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the endless stretch of red earth and dying mesquite, as if expecting something to rise from it and drag her back east. "You quiet," Eli said after nearly an hour. "I'm tired. You'll be more tired tonight. There's work to be done. Supper. We don't keep staff. I didn't ask for comfort," she said, but her voice broke on the last syllable. He turned to look at her. Just for a second. The setting sun lit her profile, high cheekbones, lips set in defiance, but eyes full of something close to panic. "I'm capable, Mr. Calderon," she said, though it sounded like a prayer. "I'll do what's needed. We'll see." The ranch rose in the distance like a shadow, low, sprawling weathered wood and tin. The porch sagged. The windmill groaned. A pair of riders circled the herd in the distance. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of frying lard drifted on the air. As they pulled up, Nacho, the cook and caretaker, stepped out, wiping his hands. His eyes landed on the woman in blue silk, and his weathered brow rose. "Senor Eli." "You married the wind juries out," Eli muttered. He climbed down and offered a hand. She hesitated before taking it, then stepped onto the porch like she was crossing a courtroom floor. Chin-high steps, precise veil fluttering just slightly. Eli watched her move, his instincts twisting tighter with every click of her boot. That woman was hiding something. He didn't know what yet. But whatever it was, it rode into his house that evening wearing perfume and lies. And he had a bad feeling it was going to set something on fire. "You said you were raised on a farm," Eli said, staring at the scorched stew, "where they burn water." The silence around the long pine table was thick enough to choke on. It stretched from one end to the other, broken only by the low creak of a chair, as Nacho leaned back, his fingers tented beneath his chin, his eyes locked on the bubbling iron pot in front of them, like it was a slow-moving disaster. Teo shifted beside him, stealing a glance toward the kitchen, where the woman, his supposed bride, had disappeared through the swinging door moments earlier, skirts rustling like wind through dry cornstalks. The air still carried the scent of lavender water and something far less pleasant, charred meat and desperation. "Maybe she was raised on one of them fancy farms," Teo offered, half-whispered. "You know, where the cooking's done by staff." "She's supposed to be the staff," Eli muttered, picking up a wooden spoon and stirring the stew, if it could be called that. The grease had separated into dark, smoking patches that pooled around misshapen lumps of what he guessed were potatoes, though they looked more like rocks dredged from the creek. He gave it one more turn before setting the spoon down with a loud clack. Nacho finally spoke. "It's hearty," he said diplomatically, and reached for the loaf of bread with the air of a man choosing survival over truth. Eli pushed back his chair and stood. His hunger was long gone, replaced by a slow-burning knot in his gut. He didn't like deception. He didn't like waste. And he sure as hell didn't like being lied to at his own table. The kitchen was hotter than it should have been. The iron stove radiated heat like a blacksmith's forge, and the woman, Mary Elena, or whatever her real name was, stood with her back to him, hands braced on the countertop. Her gray cotton dress was smeared with flour and something darker. A smear of soot streaked one cheek. Her shoulders were drawn tight, tense as a drawn wire. "I didn't ask for an apology," Eli said from the doorway. She flinched but didn't turn. "I didn't offer one," she said quietly. He took a step into the room. The smell of burnt fat clung to the air like failure. She'd used too much wood, let the flames run too hot. He didn't need to see the firebox to know it. It's a wood stove, he said flatly. Same as they have in Ohio. I know what it is. Doesn't seem like you do. She spun then fast enough that the smudge on her cheek caught the lantern light like a bruise. Her eyes, gray, storm-heavy, met his, with a defiance that was cracking at the edges. I tried. Eli's jaw tensed. Trying won't keep the crew fed. She swallowed hard and turned away again. Then feed them yourself. He stared at her back at the stiff line of her spine beneath the fabric, and something in his chest twisted sharp. Not pity. Not quite. He crossed to the cupboard, yanked it open, and pulled out a block of cheese and a crusty half-loaf. He dropped them onto the table with a thud and returned to the dining room. Bread and cheese tonight, he announced to the men without looking at them. Stew goes to the pigs, if they'll have it. No one spoke. The men ate in near silence, only the scrape of knives against wood and the low sounds of chewing filling the room. The woman didn't return. After supper, Eli stepped out onto the porch, needing space. The moon was a sliver above the dark ridge to the east, and coyotes yipped far off in the canyons. The air was cooler now, the heat of the day bleeding out into the sky. She was sitting on the steps. He didn't hear her at first. Just the shape of her hunched forward slightly arms wrapped around her knees. Her boots were off to the side. Her bare feet were dirty from the dust. A breeze lifted a few strands of her hair where they'd come loose from her braid. He walked over slow, stood beside her, hands on his hips, staring out at the quiet stretch of night. You always sit in the dirt when dinner fails, he asked. She gave a short laugh, more breath than sound. No, usually I run. He looked down at her. Why didn't you? She tilted her head back just enough to meet his eyes. Because the last time I ran, I lost everything. He didn't answer. They stood like that, he standing, she seated for a minute, maybe more. The wind whispered through the brittle grass. A shadow crossed the moon. She looked away again. I didn't come here to trick anyone. Didn't you? I came here to start over. He studied her. She sounded sincere, but sincerity could be just another layer of the disguise. He'd seen too many men in wartime make confessions with trembling hands while sharpening a blade behind their back. You might have picked the wrong place, he said. This land doesn't care much for reinvention. Neither do people, apparently. That silenced them both. Eli stepped down to the dirt, the boards groaning under his weight. He leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. You really can't cook. She smiled faintly. I can boil water. Not today. I was nervous. He snorted. I was, she insisted, laughing softly. You watch me like you're waiting for me to pull a pistol out of my bodice. I'm waiting for the truth. She looked at him again, but didn't speak. The silence stretched until the door creaked behind them. Nacho stepped out, wiping his hands. I saved some beans and coffee. You want it? Eli looked to her. She nodded. I'll bring it out, Nacho said, and vanished. They sat on the porch steps together in the growing dark, saying nothing more. She didn't offer her secrets. He didn't push. But something in the air between them had shifted, something uncertain, like the first drop of rain on dry ground. Inside, Teo's laughter rang out from the bunk room, muffled by the walls. Outside, Eli glanced sideways at the woman beside him and thought for the first time not about how soon she might leave, but what might happen if she stayed. Hand me the whiskey and get out of my way, Isadora said, rolling up her sleeves. If I don't sew him up, he'll die. The scream had come from the barn, a sharp, wet sound that cut through the stillness of the afternoon and turned every head on the Calderon ranch. Eli was in the corral when he heard it, his hand still on the flank of a skittish Mustang mid-training. He dropped the rope, vaulted the fence, and sprinted across the dusty yard before his mind could even catch up to the panic. Teo. By the time he reached the barn doors, Nacho and Pete were already dragging Teo out into the sunlight, the boy limp between them, his right leg a mangled mess beneath torn denim and blood. What happened? Eli's voice was low and dangerous the way it got when he was holding something bigger down. Timber slipped off the rack, Pete choked out. Crushed his leg. We got it off, but God, look at the blood. Teo groaned, his head rolling to one side. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Eli dropped to his knees in the dirt beside him. Blood was pooling fast, dark and slick. Too fast. His pulse pounded in his ears. Get him to the table, Eli barked. Inside, now. They carried him to the long pine table inside the house, the same one they'd eaten around just the night before. The trail of blood soaked into the floorboards. Nacho ran to the cupboard for linens. Pete stood, frozen hands, shaking. Eli tried to wrap a belt around Teo's thigh above the worst of the wound, but his fingers, always steady, fumbled. The gash was deep torn and already leaking life in thick, hot rivulets. God damn it, Eli growled. He's gonna bleed out. No, came a voice behind him, clear, cold. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the chaos. He turned. Isadora stood at the kitchen doorway. She was barefoot still in the faded gray cotton dress from the night before her braid, loose, her sleeves already rolled to her elbows. Her face was different now, every trace of fear or softness wiped clean. Her eyes were steady, her voice unflinching. Move, she said. Eli stared at her, speechless. I said move. She stepped forward, already pushing aside Nacho's trembling hands. This ain't a job for, he began, but she didn't let him finish. If you don't move, he'll die. She snapped, kneeling beside Teo, examining the wound with alarming detachment. It's the femoral. Deep laceration. Artery might be nicked. We have minutes. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn but clean. Inside, glinting silver, a curved needle, a spool of silk thread, and tiny scissors. Her hands moved quickly, ruthlessly, efficient. Eli stared at the tools, then at her. Where the hell did you get that? Not now, she muttered. Boil water, whiskey, clean rags. Nacho leapt into action. Teo, she said softly, brushing a damp lock of hair from the boy's forehead. You're going to feel pain. I need you to be brave. He gave a faint nod. Jethro, she said, pointing at the wiry tracker who had just come in pale and breathless. Hold his shoulders. Don't let him thrash. Pete legs. Do you know what you're doing? Eli asked, hovering. She looked up, and the heat in her eyes hit him like a rifle shot. It's surgical silk, she said. I'm not sewing a dress. I'm sewing a child back together. He stepped back. She poured whiskey over her hands, the needle, and the wound. Teo howled. She didn't flinch. Then without hesitation, she began stitching. Clean, even passes. No wasted motion. Her fingers were fast, precise, and confident. The blood slowed. The pulsing eased. And Teo blessedly drifted into unconsciousness. Eli watched, arms crossed tightly over his chest, every muscle drawn taut. The room smelled of sweat iron, smoke, and something else, truth. A truth that filled the air like gunpowder, just waiting for a spark. When she finished, she wiped her hands on a towel, stood and stepped back. Her body suddenly shaking as adrenaline wore off. He'll live, she said. Her voice was flat, exhausted. If he doesn't get fever. Pete sank into a chair. Nacho crossed himself. Jethro just kept staring at her like she'd grown wings or horns. Eli stared too, but not in awe, in revelation. You've done that before, he said, his voice low. Isadora didn't meet his eyes. She braced herself against the wall, breathing hard. You weren't raised on a farm, he continued. You weren't raised anywhere near one. I didn't kill anyone, she whispered. He blinked. What? She finally looked up at him, and he truly saw her for the first time. Not the silk, not the perfume, not the clumsy stew or trembling hands, but the woman beneath the layers. The one who had just saved his cousin's life. I didn't kill him, she repeated, firmer now. Whatever they told you, whatever you'll hear, I didn't kill Senator Sterling. Eli went still. A cold ripple crawled down his back. The name hit like a thrown stone. Sterling, he echoed. She nodded. I was there, but I didn't kill him. You want to explain why your name's plastered on every Pinkerton bulletin east of the Mississippi? She closed her eyes. Not here. Not like this. Outside, a sudden gust of wind kicked up dust against the windows. Teo groaned and Nacho moved to check him. I didn't come here to lie, Isadora said softly, but her voice was cracking now. I came here because I had nowhere else left to run. Eli looked at her for a long time, jaw clenched. The room around them still smelled of blood and whiskey and smoke. His boots were sticky on the floorboards. Before he could say another word, the unmistakable thunder of hooves filled the air, multiple riders fast and hard, heading straight toward the house. Eli grabbed his rifle and crossed to the window. A cloud of dust rolled over the rise beyond the cattle pens, and from within it, shapes began to form. Riders, long coats, repeater rifles, and at the front, gleaming even through the haze, a silver badge not issued by any sheriff. He knew that badge, knew what it meant. Pinkertons. Isadora stood rooted to the spot, watching the blood drain from Eli's face. Her lips parted. A soft sound left her throat. They found me, she whispered. Oh, God. They found me. Eli chambered around in the Winchester and didn't look back. Stay inside, he said coldly. Then he stepped out onto the porch to meet the men who had come to hang his bride. She's mine, Eli lied, his voice iron. And if you want her, you'd best bring fire and a coffin. The porch boards creaked beneath Eli's boots as he stepped forward, rifle balanced in the crook of his arm. The air was dry, but the scent of coming violence clung to it like ozone before a storm. 5 riders had pulled up just beyond the hitching post, dust still settling behind them. Their coats were long, dark, stiff from the trail. The lead man was older, lean, with weathered skin that stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were pale and mean-shaded beneath a flat-brimmed hat that didn't move an inch in the wind. A silver badge glinted on his chest, not a star. No lawman wore that shape out here. Eli knew what it was. Everyone in the West did. Pinkerton. Afternoon, the man said. I'm Agent Connolly. These men are mine. We're tracking a woman under the name Mary Elena Vargas. Eli didn't move. You're trespassing. Your ranch, I presume you must be Mr. Calderon. Connolly's voice was casual, but each word rolled with practiced authority. We know she arrived on the Union train out of St. Louis 2 days ago. The station master said you picked her up. Now we'd like a word. Eli glanced toward the door behind him. It hadn't opened. Good. He tightened his jaw. Picked up my wife. If you're looking to harass a man on his wedding week, I'd think twice. Connolly offered a tight smile. Congratulations, but your wife is a fugitive, wanted for the murder of Senator William Sterling. If you'd like to see the posters, I've got 3 in my saddlebags. She's not who you're looking for. She is. You've made a mistake, Calderon, and I'm giving you a chance to walk away from it. The other men behind Connolly fanned out slightly, their hands too close to their belts. Eli raised his rifle just an inch, not enough to be a threat, but enough to change the air. "You've got 5 seconds to back off my land," he said, "or we'll see how fast you city boys ride with holes in your saddles." "I don't think you understand. I understand fine. You want her, you bring a warrant and a real sheriff, not a shiny piece of tin from a rail office." Connolly's smile broke like dry bark. "You're harboring a murder suspect, Calderon. She's my wife." Connolly's hand twitched. "I don't care if she's your mother," he snapped. "She's coming with us, or we'll take her." "You make a move on my house," Eli said, steel in every syllable, "and you won't make it back to yours." One of the Pinkertons shifted in the saddle, reaching for his reins. Connolly held up a hand. "Easy." The wind whispered across the dry grass, and for a moment no one spoke. The silence stretched brittle and aching. "All right, Calderon," Connolly said. "You've made your position clear. For now." He pulled the reins, turned his horse with a sharp tug, and his men followed. The sound of hooves faded down the trail past the fence line, where sagebrush rattled against dry fence posts. Eli waited until they disappeared over the ridge before he exhaled. Behind him, the door opened. Isadora stepped out onto the porch, her face pale, her fingers trembling as they curled around the frame. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. "They'll be back," Eli said. She nodded slowly. "I know. I bought us time. That's all. I didn't mean for this." He turned to her. "What did you mean?" She looked at him, then past him toward the horizon where the dust still hung in the air. "I meant to disappear," Senator Sterling Eli said. "What happened?" She closed her eyes. Later, he said gruffly, "Inside." They sat at the table again, different now. Teo slept in the back room, his breathing shallow but steady. Nacho stood watch near the door. Pete and Jethro watched the windows, tense, jittery. Eli poured coffee, though his hands wanted something stronger. "I need the truth," he said. She sat across from him, still as a statue. "My name is Isadora Reyes," she said finally. "My father was a surgeon, chief at Bellevue Hospital in New York. I wasn't his assistant, I was his student, but no medical school would take me, so he trained me himself." Eli blinked. "That's how you did what you did?" "Yes." "And the senator?" She looked down at her hands, folded neatly on the table. "His wife came to our house, bruised, afraid. My father treated her in secret. I went with him once. The senator came home drunk. He put his hands on her. On me. I tried to stop him." Her voice broke. "He fell. Backward, down a staircase. Broke his neck." Eli's jaw clenched. "They blamed you." "Of course they did. A woman, no medical license, alone with a dead senator. I ran. A girl I knew, Mary Elena, was dying of fever in St. Louis. She gave me her name, her ticket, her blessing. I buried her under mine." Silence. Eli stood, crossed the room, poured whiskey into 2 mugs, set one down in front of her. "You brought a storm to my door," he said quietly. "I know. I've buried good men on this land. Fought off thieves, drought locusts. Never thought I'd be fighting the damn government. I'll leave tonight," she said, standing. "You've done enough. I won't let you lose your ranch for me. You wouldn't make it a mile. I have to try. You don't." She froze. "You saved my cousin's life," he said. "You've lied, yes, but you've paid for it already. If they want you, they'll have to come through me." Her eyes filled with something that wasn't quite tears. Outside, the wind changed. Eli walked to the window. The Pinkertons hadn't gone far. Lanterns flickered at the edge of the ridge. A quiet camp, waiting. "We're under siege now," Eli said. She stepped beside him. He looked at her, saw something fierce growing in her gaze. "Then let's get ready," she said. His lips twitched. "I hope you're better at shooting than you are at stew." "I learn fast," she said. And outside the lanterns kept burning, watching, waiting. "You can teach me to shoot or you can dig a grave," Isadora told Eli, "because I won't die with my hands empty." By the second day, the Pinkertons had settled in like ticks along the north fence. They pitched canvas tents just outside rifle range and strung a line of their own horses in plain view, calculated, patient, and arrogant. They didn't attack. They didn't retreat. They just sat there waiting for the walls to crack. Eli knew that kind of waiting. He'd seen it in Vicksburg when the Union surrounded the city and let time and fear rot the men inside faster than bullets ever could. This wasn't war yet, but the air carried the taste of it. Inside the house, they prepared as best they could. Ammo was rationed and counted twice. Jethro rode the perimeter each morning, checking fence lines, watching for scouts. Nacho reinforced the cellar, packed it with dried goods and jugs of water. Teo, still weak from the injury, stayed in bed, but insisted on keeping a loaded revolver under his pillow. And Isadora changed. Gone were the veils and gloves and perfume. She moved through the rooms in rolled-up sleeves, boots, muddy hair in a tight braid. She cleaned bandages, organized the pantry with military precision, and boiled water until the house smelled like a hospital. The men started calling her Doc without thinking. She never corrected them, but it wasn't enough. Eli found her in the yard that morning, standing by the fence post with a pistol in her hands. Teo's revolver held awkwardly, both hands trembling just enough to be dangerous. "Finger off the trigger," he said. She turned. Her face was drawn but steady. "I'm tired of waiting," she said. "They're not leaving. I want to be ready." "You will be," he said. "But that ain't how you hold it." He walked over and gently pried her fingers off the grip, repositioning them. His hands were rough, calloused from years of work, hers smaller, but no longer soft. She didn't flinch when he touched her. "Don't fight the kick," he said. "Let it ride through you. Breathe out when you squeeze. Not before, not after." "I've never fired a gun," she admitted. He nodded. "Good. Means you won't think you know how." He walked to the corral and set 3 tin cans on the rail, spacing them out with measured steps. "Start with the middle," he said, stepping back. "It's about 20 feet. If you can hit that, we'll talk about aiming for something that moves." She stared at the target. The revolver was heavier than she'd expected. Her arms shook slightly. "Don't think about it," Eli said. "Just line it up, breathe, squeeze." She exhaled and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out sharp and echoing. Dust kicked up behind the fence. She'd missed low. "Again," he said. The second shot clipped the top of the can, but didn't knock it off. The third sent it tumbling into the dirt. She looked at him. Better than Teo on his best day," he smirked. By sundown, she'd hit all 3 cans twice each. Her shoulder was sore. Her ears rang, but her hands no longer shook. They sat on the porch steps as dusk settled over the ranch. The lanterns still burned on the ridge. The Pinkertons hadn't moved. "I was afraid of guns," she said quietly. "Most folks are. I used to think they were only for killing." "They are," Eli said. "But sometimes that's what keeps people breathing." She looked at him. "Why are you helping me? Because I've looked men in the eye who deserved to hang," he said. "And none of them had your hands." She went quiet. A clatter of hooves broke the silence as a wagon approached from the west trail. Eli was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Jethro stepped out of the barn with his own weapon raised. But the figure who climbed down from the seat was small, bundled in a thick shawl, and holding her hands high. "Name's Marisol Vega," she called. "I was heading to Laredo. Wagon wheel snapped 2 miles back. Saw your smoke. Figured I'd rather risk a rifle than coyotes." Eli signaled to stand down. He walked out to meet her boots crunching dry dirt. "You travelin' alone?" "My father was a trader. He passed in the spring. Been bartering my way south since," she said. "I can cook so and shoot better than I look." He glanced toward Isadora, who stood just behind the porch rail watching carefully. "Got a tent?" he asked. "Can pitch it by the barn. You can use the bunkhouse. But the stove's mine." She smiled. "Fair enough." That night, Marisol made stew that tasted like something out of a Sunday kitchen. Isadora watched her, fascinated. They talked like women who had learned not to trust easily, but recognized something in each other: grit, loss, a desire to survive. Later, Isadora found Eli on the porch again. He sat with his hat tipped back, eyes on the faint glow beyond the fence. "They'll starve us out," she said. He nodded. "That's the plan. What do we do?" He took a long breath. "We dig in, we hold, we wait." For what, he looked at her, and his voice dropped to something heavier. "For the one man I trust to ride out through the canyon and come back with what we need." She watched his face. "You mean Boone Elias Boone's been with me 10 years. Knows every trail in this part of Texas. If anyone can get past those bastards and make it to Bitter Creek, it's him." She nodded slowly. "I'll help pack what he needs." "He leaves at midnight," Eli said. "They won't see him in the dark." Isadora stepped closer. "And if he doesn't come back?" Eli didn't answer. The stars came out one by one, scattered across the endless night sky. Below them, a house full of weary defenders slept in shifts. A wounded boy dreamed fitfully. A cook sharpened knives in the kitchen. A new ally folded a blanket in the bunkhouse. And Isadora stood in the doorframe watching Eli as he kept his vigil, wondering how long they could hold before something outside or within broke first. They came at dawn, not as shadows, but as fire. The sky hadn't yet broken when the first flame bloomed on the northern ridge. Eli was already outside, boots and the dirt rifle in hand. His breath fogged in the morning chill, and for a long second he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A line of fire stretched across the dry grass, creeping downward in a slow, deliberate sweep. They were burning the field. Not as cover, not for chaos. It was strategy starve, the horses smoke out, the barn cut off escape. Inside, the house stirred awake with the smell of smoke and the rising clang of warning. Jethro kicked open the front door, pulling his coat on with one hand and cradling a Winchester in the other. "They lit the pasture, Eli. I see it. They're not comin' in guns blazin'. No. They're comin' like men who ain't in a hurry." Isadora burst from the kitchen, a bucket in each hand, skirts tucked up and braids swinging behind her. Marisol followed with more shouting for Nacho to bring water from the cistern. Teo limped down the stairs with his pistol already cocked, eyes sharp, despite the bruising around his temple. "Barn first," Eli barked. "If the wind shifts, it'll go up like kindling." Jethro nodded and ran toward the stables, shouting for the horses. Eli grabbed Isadora by the arm, not roughly, but with a tight urgency. "You don't leave the porch. You understand?" She nodded once. "And you don't die out there. I'll try to be polite about it." He ran off toward the blaze. The fire licked across the dry grass with the hunger of a wild thing. The wind hadn't turned yet, but it danced nervously, carrying smoke in thick fingers toward the house. Eli, Jethro, and Nacho worked the edges with wet burlap sacks, slapping down flames and shoveling dirt. Every breath seared the throat. Every motion stung the eyes. The barn groaned under the weight of fear. Horses neighed wildly, but Jethro calmed them like he'd done 1,000 times, voice low, hands steady. They managed to drag out far enough for escape if it came to that. But Eli wasn't thinking of escape. He stood in the middle of the yard, sweat pouring down his neck, watching the last line of fire die under a wave of damp sand. They'd saved the ranch. For now. From the ridge, the Pinkertons watched. One of them raised a hand. A single pistol shot echoed through the canyon, then silence. A message. "Next time it's the house," Eli muttered. He didn't realize Isadora had come up beside him until she placed her hand on his back. "You think they're waiting for Boone to come back? I think they're hoping he doesn't." She followed his gaze out toward the hills. "Would you bet the ranch on him? I already did." He walked past her, heading toward the house. By noon, the air was thick with smoke and the tension of something unsaid. The defenders gathered in the parlor, dirty, coughing, but alive. Teo sat with his boot propped on a stool, holding a map of the property. Marisol leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We can't stay inside," Teo said. "They'll just burn us out." "They want us to panic," Eli replied. "Rush into a trap. Nacho spit into a bucket." They brought supplies, tents. They're ready to camp as long as it takes. "So we make it not worth their time," Marisol said, pulling a small pouch from her vest. She dropped it on the table. "Dynamite." Everyone stared. "Your wagon had this?" Isadora asked, shocked. "Not in the wagon," Marisol said. "Under it." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Planning to rob a train, planning not to die broke." A slow smile crept across Teo's face. "We could use that." "Not yet," Eli warned. "Boone might be close." "We hold until dark." Isadora looked out the window. The fire was down, but ash still floated like snow. "We can't let them do this again." "Not tomorrow." "They won't," Eli said, "because they're not expecting what's coming." That night the house was quiet. Everyone took turns resting. Eli stood by the north window, rifle leaning against the sill. The lanterns on the ridge were fewer tonight. He counted only 3. Movement in the distance caught his eye. A horse. Then 2. He raised the rifle, sighted, and waited. A whistle cut through the air, low, sharp, familiar. Eli stepped outside, heart pounding. "Boone." The rider slowed as he reached the gate. Covered in dust, hat down, eyes wild. But it was him. Boone swung off his horse, limping. "Made it to Bitter Creek," he rasped. "Got help." Behind him, 2 more riders emerged, U.S. Marshals. One raised a badge. "Name's Harlan Vickery. We rode hard. Heard you've got Pinkertons playing outlaw." "We've got a siege," Eli said. "They're armed, funded, probably backed by land grabs." Vickery nodded. "We'll take statements, but we came loaded." He stepped aside, revealing the 4th rider, an older man in a wide-brimmed hat and a scowl carved from stone. Isadora gasped. "Judge Latham," the man tipped his hat. "Ma'am, came to settle more than law?" Eli's jaw clenched. "Then you'd best come inside." That night they gathered again. The judge explained that Pinkertons had overstepped no warrants, no court orders. He'd seen it too often. Rich men paying for blood instead of justice. "You've held your ground," he said. "Now we make it legal." Isadora watched Boone slump in a chair near collapse. "You brought them back," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You're a hard woman to leave unprotected." Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, for the first time in days, there was breath relief, but brief, because dawn would bring another choice: stand down or finish it. And no one, not even the law, knew if the Pinkertons would listen to reason when all they wanted was control. They came with badges in their pockets and bullets in their hearts. The morning cracked open with the tension of a dry branch snapping. No birds, no breeze. Just silence so thick it felt like the land itself held its breath. Boone stood on the front porch, shirt clinging to him with sweat eyes fixed on the ridgeline. The air tasted of ash and gun oil. Behind him, Isadora stepped out slowly, her hand brushing against his arm, grounding him like a tether to something still good. They moved during the night, Boone muttered. They're closer. You sure? He nodded. Smell that gunpowder faint. They've got men staged down by the creek. The rest are still fanned out on the ridge. Inside, Judge Latham was pacing the parlor, voice gravelly and sharp. They didn't respond to the notice I sent last night. You thought they would. Eli snapped, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. I thought maybe they still had 1 ounce of respect left for federal law. Teo, seated nearby with his legs still elevated, laughed bitterly. Ain't no law they respect, but $1. Vickery the marshal polished his sidearm at the table. Well, they'll respect this badge when it comes with lead. Marisol walked in with a shotgun in hand and a can of beans under her arm. They'll respect a good ambush more. Boone turned away from the porch and stepped into the house. They've got at least 12, 4 in the draw below, 4 on the ridge, 4 circling wide. They're testing for weakness. Isadora followed him, eyes hardening. We have 6 who can shoot. 7 if you count me. Boone looked at her. She didn't flinch. You ever shot a man I've wanted to? He didn't laugh, just handed her the revolver from the mantel. You'll be up in the loft. If they breach the house, you shoot anyone who steps foot through that door. Judge Latham spoke low. I can't sanction this. You're not here to sanction it, Boone replied. You're here to witness it. Vickery nodded grimly. The law starts when the blood dries. Till then, it's survival. By midday, the sky was blank with heat. Dust rose in lazy curls along the ridge as 2 riders appeared, coming slow, easy, not threatening yet. Eli and Boone met them out front. One wore a fine hat too clean for dust, silver buckled. The other had eyes like slate and a permanent sneer under his mustache. The one with the clean hat tipped it. Elias McKenna, that's right. Boone Dempsey. You found us. I'm called Riggs, the clean one, said voice like sugar in tea. I speak for Prescott Holdings. Boone folded his arms. Don't recall asking for a meeting. Well, now that's the funny thing. You folks are squatting on land that's about to shift title. Our client purchased it fair. We're here to facilitate that transition. Eli stiffened. We ain't going anywhere. The sneer spoke this time. No, I don't reckon you are. Riggs smiled again. We're prepared to offer one final courtesy. Pack up, be gone by sundown. We'll even let you take your livestock. And if we don't, Boone asked. Riggs's smile turned tired. Then we'll take it from your widow. Boone moved so fast no one saw it coming, grabbed Riggs by the collar and yanked him off the saddle. The sneer pulled his revolver, but Eli had already drawn, aimed straight at his chest. You shoot, you die, Eli said coldly. Riggs hit the ground with a grunt, dust puffing around him. Boone leaned close. You tell Prescott if he wants this land, he can come get it himself. He let go, turned, and walked back to the porch. Riggs rose, brushing dirt from his trousers, face pale. You're making this real messy, he spat. Eli cocked his revolver with a snap. This is clean compared to what's coming. The 2 men rode off, dust trailing behind them like the tail of a snake. That night they lit no lamps. Darkness was their ally. Boone and Marisol rigged traps along the fence-line, tripwires, oil lanterns ready to break shards of glass at the entry points. Jethro buried the last of the dynamite near the trail fork. Teo, despite his wound, cleaned every rifle with care. Isadora helped Judge Latham write the final testimony, names, dates, ownership records, should the worst come to pass. You think this'll hold up in court? she asked quietly. Latham stared at the page. It might not, but history will. Near midnight, Boone sat beside her on the porch. I saw the way he looked at you, Boone said after a long silence. Riggs Boone shook his head. The Pinkerton with the sneer. He marked you. I'm not scared of him. You should be. I am. She looked at him. Then stay close. He smiled faintly. Planning to. They didn't touch. But the silence between them shifted less like a chasm, more like a breath held. A howl cut through the stillness, coyote or something worse. Then gunfire. A shot, then three more in quick succession. Eli burst out the side door, rifle ready. South fence, they're coming. Boone ran to the barn, Marisol hot on his heels. Judge Latham lit the emergency lantern, throwing long shadows across the porch. Isadora grabbed her pistol and ran to the loft. From the hill, fire bloomed again. But this time it wasn't the grass. It was the men. One trap had gone off, burning oil and glass, coating two Pinkertons in flame. Their screams cracked the night. A third stepped into a wire and triggered the dynamite. Dirt and bone rained down like thunder. Gunfire opened from the ridge. Teo returned fire from the upper window, sharp and deadly. Marisol circled behind the barn, taking two down near the corral. Boone sprinted across the yard, under cover of smoke, pulled Eli back from the front fence where the wood splintered from repeated shots. We hold here, Boone shouted. Don't let them circle the back inside. Isadora watched the front porch. A shadow crossed the threshold. She fired. The man stumbled back, clutching his chest. Another came behind him, bigger. She fired again. Click. Empty. She dropped the revolver, grabbed the rifle from the wall, and kept aiming. Her hands trembled, but she didn't blink. Downstairs, Latham kicked open the front door with surprising force, his own pistol drawn. He shot once, and the second man dropped. Then silence. The kind of silence that didn't breathe. Boone stepped into the yard, and from the ridge came the sound of retreating hooves. Only 3 made it out alive. Isadora leaned against the wall, the rifle still clutched tight. Boone looked around at the bodies, the blood, the still-burning smolder of traps sprung. They thought we were weak, he said. Vickery joined him, limping. They thought wrong. Eli nodded. But they'll come back. Judge Latham lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Then we prepare again. Only this time we send word across the territory. Prescott's campaign ends here. Boone looked up at the stars. They came with badges in their pockets and bullets in their hearts, he said. But this land doesn't answer to badges or bullets, and neither did they. The truth don't need permission. It just needs a voice. Smoke still hung in the air like a mourning shroud. The morning after the ambush broke, gray and uneasy, the scorched trail and smoldering fence posts reminding everyone that war had begun. Boone stood over a body half buried in the dirt, one of Prescott's hired guns, jaw slack, a badge pinned to his vest. Not a real badge. Bought forged or simply borrowed from the lawless. He crouched and unpinned it, holding it up to the early light like it might speak truth. It didn't. Just cold metal wrapped in lies. Eli walked up beside him, jaw set. The marshal counted 6 dead. 3 escaped on horseback, but one of 'em's bleeding bad. Marisol followed their tracks halfway to the arroyo before turning back. They'll regroup, Boone said. And next time they won't bring amateurs. They're testing us. No. They're stalling. Prescott's building something bigger behind this. Boone's eyes trailed to the north ridge where nothing moved but crows. Inside the house, Isadora sat at the table with Teo wrapping his shoulder in fresh bandages. His face had paled, sweat beading along his brow, but he gave her a tired smile. Still got my trigger finger, he joked. She smiled faintly, pulling the knot tight. You ever get tired of being the bravest man in the room? I'm just too dumb to run. Judge Latham sat across from them, studying the documents spread across the table, ledgers, land grants, deeds, and newspaper clippings. Marisol leaned over his shoulder, eyes sharp. This right here, she said, pointing to a mining license dated 6 months prior. This land was reclassified on paper before the McKennas even received the foreclosure notice. Prescott filed intent to extract under a shell company. Latham adjusted his glasses. And if we can trace ownership, we can prove the foreclosure was manufactured. Illegal. Boone entered hat in hand. But proving it and stopping it are two different fights. Then we fight on both fronts, Latham said firmly. Court and country. Teo grunted. You gonna argue constitutional law while they burn the barn down? Boone looked at the documents. We need a voice, someone who isn't buried under this conflict. Isadora stood. We send it to Miss Lockridge. Eli looked up. The journalist Boone's brow furrowed. The one in San Miguel. She interviewed my father years ago when he won the water rights dispute. She's still publishing for the Territorial Chronicle. Big circulation. And she hates land barons. Marisol crossed her arms. You think she'll print a story like this? We don't have time to wait for printing presses? We don't have time not to? Isadora said. You think people won't care about hired gunmen killing ranchers to steal land? This isn't just about us. This is about who gets to live and who's allowed to own. Boone looked at her, fire in her eyes. Not fear. He nodded. Fine, he said. But we need someone to deliver it. Teo tried to sit up straighter. I can ride. No, Isadora cut in. You can barely stand. I'll go, said Marisol. I can make the trip by dusk if I cut across Skeleton Pass. That's a 2-day ride, Boone said. Not if you ride like hell. He looked at her, weighing the risk. Finally, he nodded. You leave at sundown. No trail. Ride silent. By afternoon, they'd compiled everything: names, bank records, copies of land filings, photographs of burned structures and bullet-riddled fences. Latham sealed it in oilskin, wrapped it tight. Boone handed the packet to Marisol. This is louder than any bullet. She took it, eyes fierce. I'll make it sing. That night, under moonlight, they saddled a lean mare, fast and quiet. Boone walked her to the trailhead. The land stretched vast before them, the stars overhead like scattered prayers. You know they'll be watching the main roads, he said. Then I won't use roads. He handed her a second revolver. Don't hesitate. Marisol smirked. I never do. She rode off without another word, dust kicking up behind her like a ghost trail. Boone watched until the darkness swallowed her whole. Back at the house, Isadora sat on the porch steps, hands folded in her lap. Boone lowered himself beside her legs, stretched out hat in his hands. She'll make it, Isadora said. I know. They sat in silence for a while. Boone finally spoke. When this started, I thought it was about land, just dirt and fences. But now, it's about power, Isadora said. Who's allowed to have a future? He turned to her. You ever wonder what happens after she didn't answer right away? Then quietly, I think about it every night. About a quiet house, maybe a garden, about waking up and not fearing who's at the gate. He nodded. That's worth fighting for. A wind stirred the dust, warm and dry. The porch creaked as if the house exhaled. Inside, Latham continued scribbling affidavits, and Eli cleaned the rifles for the 3rd time that day. The house felt alive now, not just shelter but cause. A line drawn in the dirt. Morning would bring new threats. Boone knew that. Prescott wouldn't back down. But for the first time in weeks, they had something stronger than guns: the truth. and it was moving fast toward San Miguel. Before dawn, Isadora found Boone already awake, buckling his holster. "You heading out?" he nodded. "They'll know Marisol left by now. I'm riding out to draw them west, away from the pass. You go alone." He smiled. "You sound like you care." "I do." Boone paused. "Then trust me." She looked away. "I do." He walked to his horse, mounted in one fluid motion, and turned to her. "The truth don't need permission," he said. "It just needs a voice." And with that, he rode into the rising light, his silhouette sharp against the ridge. Behind him on the porch, Isadora whispered, "Come back to me." Cowards attack in daylight when they think no one's watching, but we see them now. The sun hung low and mean that morning, casting long shadows across the ranch. The smell of burned timber still clung to the air, sharp and sour. Teo stood on the front steps with a shotgun resting across his chest, his bandaged shoulder twitching every time he shifted his weight. Eli was by the corral, tightening the reins on the horses and keeping one eye on the ridge. Judge Latham sorted legal documents on the kitchen table, his pen scratching the paper like a ticking clock. Isadora moved quietly through the house, checking shutters, reinforcing latches. The silence between them all felt like something fragile, tight stretched too thin to hold much longer. They were waiting. Boone had been gone for nearly 2 days. No word, no sign. Not even a bird call from the northern ridge. Isadora stood at the window watching the horizon, fingers curled around the curtain edge. Her stomach hadn't settled since he left. "I should have gone with him," she muttered. Teo's voice came from the door. "Then who would have kept the rest of us standing?" She didn't answer, just turned away and checked the rifle leaning by the hearth. Around midday, Marisol burst through the front gate, her horse frothing at the mouth and her eyes wild with dust and fire. "They printed it," she said, breath ragged. Lockridge ran it, front page titles, "Blood on the Land, a ranch stolen by greed." She gave it the whole spread. Judge Latham's head snapped up. "Circulation half the territory. It'll reach the capital by week's end." Latham stood, hope sparking in his eyes for the first time in days. "Then the courts will have to respond." Eli stepped forward. "Prescott won't wait for courts. He'll respond first with fire." Marisol's face turned grim. "That's not all. I saw them. 5 riders, maybe 6, following Boone's decoy trail. But I doubled back and picked up another trail. They're coming straight here." "How far out?" Teo asked. "Maybe a mile, maybe less." Everyone sprang into motion. Teo limped out to the barn to prepare the back entrance. Eli strung a line of old lanterns along the southern fence and filled them with kerosene. Marisol handed rifles to anyone with 2 working arms. Latham packed the evidence into a saddlebag and tied it to a horse already half-saddled. Isadora moved through it all with purpose, giving orders like breath, fast and sure. She set pots to boil for treating wounds, reinforced the porch rails, and loaded spare bullets into oilskin satchels. Then came the sound hooves. Dozens. The horizon flickered with riders, dust rising behind them like a thundercloud. Not townsfolk, not ranchers, hired men, guns for sale and pride for rent. They galloped toward the ranch house formation, tight and blades of sunlight glinting off their rifles. Isadora stood on the porch, rifle in hand boots, planted, her dress tugged tight at the waist like armor. Marisol crouched behind a bale of hay with her scope aimed at the ridge. Eli waited in the trees like a ghost. "They're trying to flush us out," Marisol whispered. "They think we're scared," Isadora replied. The riders didn't slow. Their leader, a tall man with a scar slashed across his throat, raised a hand and shouted, "You got one chance to come out. The land's ours now." Isadora raised her voice. "Then you'll have to take it over our bodies." You're making this hard, girl. No. Prescott did when he lied. The man chuckled. Suit yourself. He waved again, and the riders fanned out surrounding the ranch like wolves. Then came the shots, sharp, piercing, hitting fences, and beams shattering glass. Marisol fired once and dropped a man off his horse. The rest ducked. Eli moved like smoke darting between tree lines and taking down 2 more. Teo opened the barn door and let out the back horse, drawing fire away. The house shook with blasts, but it stood. Inside, Judge Latham took up a rifle and fired through the window. He hadn't held a gun in decades, but his hands were steady. He shouted to Isadora, "If they breach, go for the stable. Ride west. Don't wait." But Isadora had no intention of running. Her father had raised her to fight with her back straight even when her knees shook. A rider broke through the fence line and charged straight toward the porch. She fired once, missed, fired again, hit his shoulder. He fell and the horse reared. Another came right behind, but Eli stepped out from behind the shed and tackled him clean off his saddle. Marisol's voice rang from the loft. More coming down the north slope. Isadora cursed under her breath and ran inside, grabbing the satchel with court papers. She shoved them into her jacket and looked around. The house groaned, boards straining against the attack. Judge Latham pressed a bloody rag to his arm. "You have to go." "No. You're the only one they'll listen to." A gunshot cracked through the window, grazing the wood beside her face. Splinters bit her cheek. "I'm not leaving them." "You're not," he said, meeting her eyes. "You're saving them." She looked to the stairwell. Teo was there, blood on his sleeve but steady on his feet. Marisol covered the ridge. Eli moved like a phantom through trees. Then a horn blew from the eastern trail. Isadora froze. "That's Boone's horn." The scarred man paused, hand raised again. His eyes turned toward the sound, uncertain. The riders hesitated, and then Boone appeared, riding fast from the bluff, shotgun raised. Behind him were 3 more riders, local ranchers, folks who'd read the article, folks who remembered the McKenna's kindness. They charged down the hill like a storm front. The tide turned. Prescott's men wavered. Eli took out another. Marisol hit the scarred man in the leg. Chaos rippled through the enemy lines as men turned and scattered. Boone galloped through them like thunder rifle cracking. Isadora ran from the porch, shouting to Latham, "They're running." Latham fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the noise and blood and victory. Isadora ran to Boone as he dismounted, his shirt soaked with sweat, a shallow cut above his brow. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." She grabbed him, pulling him close. Boone held her tight. "Cowards attack in daylight when they think no one's watching, but we see them now. Everyone sees them." The gunfire had stopped. Smoke curled above the house. Bodies and blood marked the dirt. But the ranch still stood, and so did they. The truth doesn't beg for permission. It thunders through silence until justice trembles. Smoke still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. The fires had been put out. The bodies moved to the edge of the property, and the ranch's silence felt heavier than the gunfire had been. Isadora stood by the corral, one hand resting on the fence rail, the other wrapped tightly around a leather satchel, still damp with blood. Inside were the signed affidavits, property deeds, and statements Marisol had collected, their last shot at justice. Boone stood behind her, his fingers brushing lightly along her back, not speaking. There was no need. The quiet between them carried everything unsaid: fear, relief, the weight of victory, and the cost it demanded. His shirt was torn, a raw scrape down his arm, still seeping through the bandage, but he was alive. They all were somehow. Teo sat on the porch arm in a sling cigarette burning down to his knuckles. He didn't flinch. Eli was out back carving fresh crosses for the graves they would dig before sundown. Marisol had gone into town again, not for supplies this time, but to testify. The riders who'd stood with Boone were still there, camped near the river bend, watching the ranch like a ring of quiet sentries. Some were old friends. Most were strangers who'd read the paper, felt something crack open inside and rode out to protect what little good still held ground in the West. Judge Latham came limping down the porch steps with his coat pressed tight to his chest and his eyes fierce beneath the brim of his hat. "We ride in tonight," he said. Boone's brow tightened. "It's too soon. They're scattered, but not gone." "And if we wait," Latham's voice was firm, "Prescott will rebuild his story, clean the blood off his boots, and go back to charming judges over whiskey and coin." Isadora turned. "Then let's end it while the truth is loud." They left before dusk. Boone, Isadora, Latham, and Marisol rode together with the satchel of evidence tied to Boone's saddle horn. Eli and Teo stayed behind with the others to guard the ranch. The sky was painted in burnt oranges and bruised purples as they made their way toward the town. Lockridge wasn't asleep. Not anymore. As they rode in, townspeople stepped off sidewalks, tipping their hats or folding their arms, watching every movement. The article had done its work. Folks had seen the pictures: burned fields, bloodied boots, sworn statements from ranchers and workers who no longer feared Prescott's lawyers. It was no longer just a personal fight. It was public. At the courthouse, the marshal met them at the steps. "We heard gunfire," he said flatly. Boone nodded. "We put it out." The marshal gave a curt nod and stepped aside. "He's inside. He's not smiling." They entered together. The courtroom was half filled already, ranchers, traders, a few newspaper men with notepads open like hungry mouths. Prescott sat near the front in a tailored black suit, a bandage on his temple, and fire in his eyes. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something, but Prescott didn't move. Just stared as Boone and Isadora took their seats beside the judge. Judge Latham stood slow and straight and handed the leather satchel to the court clerk. "These are the documents related to the McKenna Ranch fraud land grab and coordinated attacks. Included are notarized statements, signed contracts falsified under pressure, and affidavits from victims and eyewitnesses. I request they be entered into official record." The courtroom was still as breath held tight in lungs. Prescott's lawyer stood oily and smooth. "Your Honor, I must protest. This is nothing but a desperate spectacle. Emotional manipulation on the back of a few dirt farmers with imaginations too large for their means." Before the judge could respond, Isadora stood. Her voice didn't tremble. "My family bled for that land. My mother died trying to protect it. My brother still limps from wounds those men gave him. We didn't fabricate stories, we lived them. And the soil out there still drinks from what they spilled." Prescott stood now too, arms wide, smiling with venom. "You don't get to twist law into theater. You think because a few bruises made it into a newspaper you can cry your way into ownership." Marisol rose slowly. "We didn't cry. We bled. And now we speak." She handed the judge a folded piece of paper. "That's a signed confession from one of the hired men. He's agreed to testify. Said Prescott paid him double if there were no witnesses." Prescott's grin broke teeth clenching. His lawyer stepped back pale. Judge Braithwaite tapped his gavel once. "Order. The documents will be reviewed. The court will recess until tomorrow for formal arguments." Prescott hissed as he passed Isadora. "You think this ends with papers and speeches? You think the dirt'll forget who it belongs to?" Isadora didn't flinch. "The land doesn't belong to liars." As he stormed out, the courtroom stirred with murmurs, some shocked, some inspired. Boone touched Isadora's arm. "You spoke truth," loud and clear. She looked up at him. The truth doesn't beg for permission. It thunders through silence until justice trembles. That night, they stayed in the church basement at the edge of town. It was safer than the inn where Prescott's money still greased pockets. Isadora couldn't sleep. She sat beneath the stained glass window watching the moon cut through red and blue shards on the floor. Boone joined her quietly. "You did it," he said. "We haven't won yet." "No. But we're not alone now. They see him. They see us." She leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the silence settle around them like a blanket. "We won't just save our land," she whispered. "We'll save everyone too scared to speak." Boone didn't answer. He just held her hand and listened to the quiet hum of justice finally beginning to stir. Redemption isn't given. It's earned one scar, one truth, and one stand at a time. The sky was still gray when Isadora opened her eyes, the morning filtering through the frosted windows of the church basement. The wooden rafters above her creaked with the chill wind, and the soft murmur of Marisol's breathing was the only other sound. Boone had already gone his spot on the floor, empty but warm. He had a habit of waking early, pacing the edges of the day, like a man afraid it might run out on him. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from days of tension and travel. The hearing would start soon, and with it, the trial that would determine everything they had fought for. Not just their land, but their voices buried for years beneath the weight of Prescott's power and a town too scared to speak. Isadora wrapped herself in Boone's duster and stepped out into the morning light. Across the square, the courthouse loomed, the flag limp against the pole. A quiet stillness rested over Lockridge, like the town itself was holding its breath. Boone leaned against the well in the center of the street, eyes on the horizon. He didn't turn when she approached. "They'll bring him in under guard," he said quietly. "Town's afraid he'll run." "Or lash out," she replied. "Cornered men make reckless choices. He's not the only one cornered." Boone finally looked at her. "You ready?" Isadora's eyes didn't waver. "I've been ready since the first time he sent a man to burn my fields." Inside the courthouse, the pews were packed. Ranchers with dust still on their boots. Widows with folded hands. Young boys and old men alike. They filled the benches like witnesses at a reckoning. Judge Braithwaite sat at the bench, face solemn, black robe, neat but eyes hard. Prescott entered with 2 marshals at his side. No more smugness, no sharp grin. He looked smaller without his usual entourage of lawyers and charm, his hair matted from a rough night, his eyes bloodshot. His lawyer fumbled through his opening argument, trying to discredit the testimony, casting doubt on the affidavits and signed confessions. He leaned hard into the idea of fabrication and revenge. He called Isadora an embittered daughter of a failed family, Boone, a disgraced soldier with a thirst for violence. But the courtroom didn't move. They had read the papers, seen the bruises, heard the quiet strength in Marisol's voice and the unwavering steel in Isadora's testimony. When it came time for Boone to speak, the courtroom hushed. "I ain't a man of many words." He began, standing tall in a plain shirt with his hat in hand. "But I know what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. I fought under men who'd rather die than let a lie take root. I watched friends fall so others could live free. And when I came back, I saw that kind of honor was dying here, not from war, but from silence." He turned, gaze cutting across the room, and finally landed on Prescott. "This man has spent years stealing more than land. He stole trust. He made fear a currency. And he broke good people because he thought no one would stop him." Isadora stood next, her voice clear. Prescott didn't just destroy my father's name, he tried to bury our future. But the land remembers truth just like people do. And truth always finds daylight, even if it has to dig through ash and bone. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge raised a hand. Enough, we've heard the arguments. I'll review the evidence and return shortly. Court recessed, and the room exhaled all at once. Isadora stepped out with Marisol and Boone into the courtyard. Sunlight broke weakly through the clouds. Children ran along the edge of the square, chasing each other like nothing had happened. Life still pressed forward. Marisol crossed her arms. He'll run if he thinks the verdict won't go his way. He won't get far, Boone replied. Too many folks watching now. Truth lit a fire, and this town finally wants to feel warm again. Isadora sat on the edge of the fountain. Even if the verdict's in our favor, this doesn't end here. He's too slick, too connected. Marisol smiled faintly. Then we keep pressing. We ride that truth until there's no room left for lies. Minutes passed. Then the courtroom bell rang. Boone offered Isadora his hand, and together they walked back in, side by side. Judge Braithwaite stood as they entered, his face carved from stone. This court, after careful review of the submitted documents, testimonies, and prior investigations, finds in favor of the plaintiffs. The land will be returned. All fraudulent deeds nullified. Charges will proceed to a criminal trial in the Capitol Court. Until then, Prescott is remanded to the custody of the U.S. Marshal. A wave of quiet gasps swept through the room, followed by stillness. Prescott exploded. This is a farce. You all believe her. Her a ranch girl and a half-crazed soldier. He lunged forward, breaking past the marshal. Boone stepped between Prescott and the bench, his hand steady on his revolver but not drawn. You're done, Cyrus. It's over. Prescott snarled, but the second marshal tackled him from behind. Metal cuffs snapped shut. As they dragged him out, his eyes met Isadora's one final time. You think this is justice, he spat. You've only just begun to lose. Isadora didn't blink. No, I've just begun to live. The doors closed behind him, and the courtroom slowly erupted into applause. It wasn't raucous, it was reverent. A sound not of celebration, but of relief. Outside, Isadora stood in the sun, the wind tugging loose strands of her hair. Boone came up beside her. You all right? He asked. She nodded slowly. I don't feel like a survivor anymore. I feel like someone who fought. He smiled. You did more than fight. You won. She turned to him, her voice quiet. Redemption isn't given. It's earned, one scar, one truth, and one stand at a time. Boone touched her cheek. Then you've earned every inch of this world. She closed her eyes, letting the light settle on her face, the weight of fear finally peeling away. But far off over the hills, clouds still gathered. Boone followed her gaze. We should get home, he said. This land's got healing to do. And maybe so did they. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's learning how to carry it without letting it define you. The sun hung low over the ridge when they returned to the ranch. The land was quiet, but not empty. Wind passed through the tall grass with a kind of reverence, as if it too understood what had shifted. The barn stood like a sentinel, the wood scarred by fire, yet still upright, defiant. A few fence lines leaned drunkenly from neglect, and the house bore scorch marks on one wall, but it was home. Their home. Boone stepped out of the saddle and tied off the reins. Isadora followed her boots, crunching on the gravel path. Behind them, Marisol dismounted with ease, her shoulders lighter than they had been in weeks. Doesn't feel real, Marisol said, her eyes sweeping the land. After everything. After all he did. We're back. Isadora ran her hand along the porch rail, the rough wood scraping her fingertips like it was waking from sleep. It'll take time, she murmured. To rebuild. To believe this place is really ours again. Boone set his hat on the hook by the door. Land remembers pain, but it remembers love, too. You just have to remind it which to hold on to. Inside the house smelled of old ash and cold stone, but beneath it the scent of pine soap and warm dust remained. Boone moved room to room, opening windows, letting in fresh air. Isadora lingered in her father's study, fingers trailing over the cracked spine of a ledger. Dust rose from the shelves like ghosts, memories long pressed into silence. She paused at the fireplace. The portrait of her father still hung above the mantel, slightly tilted. She straightened it. "We did it, Pa," she whispered. "We got it back." Outside, Boone was already chopping wood sleeves, rolled high, sweat glinting on his brow despite the chill in the air. He needed motion, needed the rhythm of work to settle the restlessness inside him. Marisol emerged with a bucket heading toward the chicken coop. Some of them survived. Not many, but enough to start again. Boone gave a nod, his axe splitting through a thick log with a clean crack. The day passed in fragments, rebuilding fence posts, sweeping out the barn, oiling saddles long untouched. Neighbors trickled in by evening. Mrs. Halberd brought canned peaches and warm bread. Luis dropped off spare lumber. Even old Sheriff Ray came by, quiet but sincere, with a bottle of whiskey and a wordless handshake. Boone sat on the porch with the bottle, later the stars blinking overhead. Isadora joined him, 2 mugs in hand. She passed him one, then wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "You ever think peace would look like this?" she asked. Boone took a sip before answering. "Didn't think peace was meant for me at all. Not for men who've done the things I've done." Her voice was soft. "You carried others' burdens, Boone. You didn't build them." He looked out across the dark fields. "Doesn't always matter. The weight's still there." "You're not alone anymore," she said, laying her hand gently on his. "We carry it together now." He looked down at their hands, then nodded once, like a man still learning the shape of something good. Later that night, sleep didn't come easy. Boone tossed in the old guest room, the mattress too soft, the walls too quiet. He rose before dawn, drawn outside by the pull of habit. The air was crisp, the sky painted in pale hues of gold and blue. He wandered past the barn, through the lower pasture, until he reached the old creek bed. The water still flowed there, quiet and cold, carving its way through the rocks like it always had. He crouched and ran a hand through it, watching the ripples dance. Then he sat back against a stone hat, tipped low. Isadora found him an hour later, 2 tin cups of coffee in hand. She sat beside him, without a word, passing him one. The silence between them was full, not empty. He finally spoke. "Sometimes I think I don't know how to live when I'm not fighting." She nodded slowly. "That's because the fight leaves a shape in you, an edge you get used to leaning on." He glanced at her. "You feel it too, every day," she whispered. "But we don't have to let it shape us forever. We can choose to be something else." Boone stared into the trees. "What if I don't know how you learn? The same way you learned how to fight, step by step. One sunrise at a time." The sun climbed higher, warming the earth. Birds called from the branches. The world didn't stop, not for war, not for pain. It moved forward. Later, Boone repaired the front gate while Isadora and Marisol catalogued what was left in the pantry. Boone worked in silence, lost in the rhythm of hammering nails and sawing boards. Sweat streaked down his neck, and his muscles ached in a good grounding way. Then came a sound behind him, hoofbeats slow and heavy. He turned, tension curling in his gut, until he saw the familiar face of Eli, the local post rider. "Got something for you?" Eli said, pulling a yellowed envelope from his satchel. Came from the district court. Boone took it, brows furrowed. Isadora stepped onto the porch just as he tore the seal. Her voice was wary. "What is it?" Boone read the page once, then again. "It's from the prosecutor. Prescott's lawyers filed an appeal. They want to delay the trial indefinitely, claim he's unfit to stand." Isadora's face tightened. "He's trying to slip through again." Boone folded the letter slowly. "They won't let it go easy." She looked toward the fields. "Then neither will we." Marisol joined them, eyes flicking between their faces. "What's wrong?" Isadora met her gaze. "We're not finished yet. Prescott's fighting from the shadows now." Boone's voice was quiet but resolute. "Then we shine more light." That night, as they sat around the fire outside, the wind picking up across the hills, Isadora looked at Boone and spoke softly. "Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's learning how to carry it without letting it define you." Boone stared into the flames, the words sinking in. He nodded, the flicker of resolve in his eyes matching hers. Whatever came next, they would face it. Together. The educational lesson learned from this story is that healing does not come from forgetting what hurt us, but from facing it with courage and allowing love and community to help carry the weight. Life may scar us, but it also gives us the tools to rebuild through kindness, resilience, and shared strength. Especially in our later years, it's a gentle reminder that peace isn't about having no wounds. It's about no longer letting them define who we are. Reclaiming hope, no matter how long it's been lost, is always possible when we do it together.